In today's video, I'm going to be showing you a typical temperature chart that you'd like to see when you're tracking your cycle. That is, if you're tracking your cycle to avoid pregnancy, so as a contraceptive, or if you're trying to conceive, or if you just want to live more in sync with your cycle, or you are wanting some feedback loops about your health, your hormonal health, or your general health. Before I get into it, I just want to put in two quick disclaimers. So the first one is that this is not advice, most definitely not medical advice. I'm sharing information that I've gathered and my experience and maybe some recommendations that I found helpful, but they are definitely not me telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing. So please take what serves you and just leave what doesn't serve you. Particularly for those who are using this method as a contraceptive method, I would strongly recommend that you watch my video on how not to get pregnant prior to watching this video. In that video, I cover a lot of the aspects of the fertility awareness method, whereas in this video, I'm literally just going to discuss the temperature chart that you can typically see and what it means if there are certain outliers or different things in the chart. But I'm not going to be discussing any of the other markers, so I strongly recommend that you watch that video for a broader context of the fertility awareness method. Then also, I'm not going to be discussing how to get an accurate temperature or tips around how to take your temperature in this video. I've done that in another video and I've linked that down below. If you want to watch that video first, just to make sure that the pattern that you're hoping to see is accurate and the information that you're going to take from it is an accurate representation of what's going on in your body, as opposed to being a little bit all over the place because of the way that you're taking your temperature. So again, please watch that video before you watch this video. I understand that it can take a little bit of time to get the hang of tracking your cycle, especially if you want to do like a really in-depth way of tracking your cycle the way that I do. So if you'll find it helpful, I start my social media day by posting a picture of my journal with the date, my cycle day, and my basal body temperature for that day on my Instagram every single day. And I make a comment if there's anything to comment about. So I make a comment about why it is showing a certain temperature, what we can expect to happen in a couple of days. When it does happen, I point it out in hindsight. If there's an outlying temperature, I explain that. So I say, oh, I woke up 2 or 3 hours later than usual. That's why this temperature is a little bit higher. And by watching that, you can learn with me as I go through it. So let's get into the video for today. You want to typically see this pattern. This is what we're going to talk about. So you're going to chart your cycle, and the first day of your cycle is the first day you see red blood. That is typically your menstrual phase or your bleed or your winter, whatever you want to call it. It's the first day of red blood, i.e. your period. It is not the first day that you see spotting. Spotting isn't your period. All right, so take that as cycle day 1. That's where your cycle tracking starts. Now, the next phase that comes after that phase, your follicles are growing, so it's your follicular phase. Once your follicles have grown, they're going to burst to release an egg, and then you have your ovulation. So ovulation is not a phase, it's more like a day, but I like to refer it as my entire fertile window is my ovulation phase, but it's technically just a day. And once you've ovulated, your body makes a cyst called the corpus luteum, and that cyst produces progesterone, which alters your temperature. And in that phase, it's called the luteal phase. It's either named after all of the things happening, or it's your autumn if you want to refer to them by their seasons. And I like doing that. And then once your luteal phase is over and your bleed starts, that is a new cycle. So those are the 4 phases of your cycle. Now, taking it back to the beginning and what you're typically going to see happen with your temperatures through those 4 phases of your cycle. Okay, so on the first day of your cycle, you're either going to have seen that your temperature fell right before your bleed and it's on the lower end already on the first day of your cycle, or the progesterone is still high and it's still kind of got like a bit of leftover or something, so the temperature is taking a day or so to come down once you've had your bleed. So don't worry too much about what your temperature is in the first like 1 to 2 to 3 days of your cycle, because typically it will either have fallen or it's going to fall pretty quickly. And when I say low, for me, that means it's going to be under 36.5 degrees Celsius. I take my temperature hourly, so just to put that into context, if you take your temperature via a different body part, then you're going to have to look up what the ranges are for that body part, but I'm just sharing what my typical temperatures are. And again, I take it in degrees Celsius and not Fahrenheit, so just also do that conversion as you're watching this video if you take your temperature in Fahrenheit. If in your bleed phase you do get a bunch of high temperatures, so as in higher than you would generally expect for that phase, just make a note if it's an outlier. Make a note if you know why it's particularly high, or maybe it's because of alcohol consumption, maybe you woke up later that day, maybe there's something that you know that's impacted it to cause it to be a little bit higher or a little bit lower than usual. Just whatever you're looking for in your cycle when you're tracking it, my recommendation is make notes if you know why it is higher or lower than you would usually expect it to be. Okay, so then that low temperature, I can expect to keep that throughout my follicular phase. I can generally expect to see a temperature below 36.5 or lower in my follicular phase. Anything above that is a bit of an outlier for me. It's unusual to see that. It's not a cause for concern. I usually know why that's that outlier, but it's just not the typical. And as you enter your ovulation, you're typically going to see just that lower maintain. You may or you may not see an ovulation dip, but please don't expect it or get bummed out if you don't have it. The reason for that is I've been tracking my cycle for a long time, many years, and I have had an ovulation dip a handful of times. It has not made a difference to my health when I see it. I'm not in a better or worse condition if I do or don't have an ovulation dip. It's just a nice thing to note, but I definitely don't expect to have it, and I don't look out for it. Oftentimes, I actually only notice it in hindsight. When I'm looking at my chart and I see, oh, okay, my temperature went down a little extra bit there when I was ovulating before it moved to my post-ovulation temperatures. So I'm saying that more for people who are trying to conceive, because I understand that that journey can be quite a different one, and then often we can end up looking for certain signs from our cycle and maybe putting a lot of emphasis on certain signs, but an ovulation dip is not a good or a bad thing, it's just a thing. Okay, now you've ovulated and your body has created the cyst, which has started producing progesterone, and progesterone will increase your basal body temperature, and then what you will typically see on your chart is you will see it jump up after ovulation. So like I explained, pre-ovulation and at ovulation, I'm typically looking at 36.5 or lower. And then as soon as I've ovulated, I can expect to see a temperature of 36.8 degrees Celsius or higher. 36.8 is generally my lowest post-ovulation temperature that I will get. So I just want to say in here, please be mindful when you are reading content about tracking your cycle, whether they are speaking about Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius, because that can sometimes give you a misperception. I had somebody tell me that they were incredibly worried that their jump between their pre-ovulation and post-ovulation wasn't high enough because an article had said it needs to jump by a degree. I'm assuming it meant a degree Fahrenheit and not a degree Celsius, because an entire jump from like 36 to 37, that's a massive jump. In my case, I'm typically looking at a 0.3 to a 0.5 degree jump between pre-ovulation and ovulation to post-ovulation. So today I'm on day 25 of my cycle. I am in my luteal phase and my temperature this morning was 37.2 degrees Celsius. For your entire luteal phase, you can expect to see that temperature maintain its highness. That's a terrible way to describe that. But anyway, your temperature is going to stay high for your entire luteal phase. And then it will either drop right before your bleed, or you will get your bleed and it will drop shortly thereafter. Sometimes it's quite a nice one. I take my temperature in the morning and it comes back, it's like 36.5, and I know I'm gonna get my bleed later that day. I will discuss what it means if your temperature stays high or if it didn't stay high for the whole luteal phase. I will get to that in this video, but I just want to quickly depict what a typical chart will look like for you. So a typical chart will look like at the beginning of your cycle, it's either still high from your bleed or it has dropped like I'm showing in this case. And then it's going to stay low. Maybe you're going to have an ovulation dip, maybe you're not, and then you're going to see the jump. After ovulation, it's going to stay high until you get your bleed again or right before you get your bleed again. So what are your temperatures telling you? When you look at this pattern, or if there's something that you don't have about this pattern or something different in your cycle, what is that telling you? What information can we take from that? I think that the temping is the best way to confirm ovulation. So I love using my cervical fluid to know when my fertile window is going to open. And I like playing around with LH tests. I don't do them every cycle, but I like playing around with them. Again, they trigger, your LH triggers ovulation, but it's only through that rise in temperature that you can really confirm that ovulation has taken place. So temping cannot be used to predict ovulation. It will not be able to tell you before the time that ovulation is coming. It will only be able to tell you after that ovulation has taken place. Which is why I strongly recommend using at least one other primary fertility awareness marker. But if I can just give you an example, there was a cycle, and I will make videos discussing, examples of cycles that I've had and taking you through my chart and what impacted it and what didn't. But there's a specific cycle. It was very important to me to know when I was ovulating in that specific cycle. And I remember my pre-ovulation temps had abnormally gone up a bit. I was seeing luteal phase type temperatures in my pre-ovulation, and I knew that I hadn't ovulated yet. And I think my fertile window hadn't even opened yet when I started seeing those high temperatures. So my assumption was that my body had just heated up my temperatures just a little, not enough for fever. It was definitely not, I don't even think it was above 37, but I was seeing abnormally high temperatures. And I really had to rely on my cervical fluid to know that ovulation was coming, because I didn't really have that typical jump. What I saw there was before ovulation, my temperatures went up and then they never came back down, because as soon as my body had healed and stopped heating itself up for whatever reason it was doing that, I had already ovulated and gone into my luteal phase temperatures. So instead of seeing this, I was seeing this. And it was wonderful to have a different marker, because there are things that can throw off your temperature that isn't cycle related. So I think temping is an amazing way to confirm whether or not you are ovulating. If you have very long cycles, I think it might be incredibly helpful for you to be able to determine why your cycles are long. Are they long because you're not ovulating and eventually the lining gets so heavy that it's just shedding? Or are they long because you ovulate quite late in a cycle, relative to the average of around like 12 to day 15 or 16 when people generally ovulate? So you can, for example, have a cycle that is 45 days where you didn't ovulate, or you can have a cycle where it's 45 days and you did ovulate, just a lot later than the average. And just important to remember with tracking your cycle, if it is longer than the average, the thing that's moving is your ovulation. You don't ovulate halfway through a cycle. So if you have a 30-day cycle, it's not necessarily that you ovulated on day, that was a terrible example. All right. Let's say you have a 40-day cycle. It's not necessary that you ovulated on day 20, because we have a more or less fixed luteal phase. What that means is if your cycle is long, we're expecting a luteal phase to be around 12 to 14 days. That's your typical luteal phase. If your cycle is long, what generally would have happened is you have a long period in your follicular phase, and then you ovulate, and then 2 weeks later, you have your period. So you see it will shift with ovulation, but generally you can expect to get your bleed. Once you've ovulated, you can expect to get your bleed 12 to 14 days after ovulation. Now, the other information that you'll be able to get from temping is whether or not you have a deficiency in your luteal phase. Something you might want to be aware of if, for example, like us, we were using temperature tracking. Well, I was using it predominantly for feedback loops on my hormonal health and to avoid conception, but we knew we were going to try to conceive after a period of time. And if you want to monitor what's going on in your cycle with the mindset of that you want to try to conceive in a while, if you have a luteal phase deficiency, it may have an impact on your conception, and it might be helpful for you if you can start to address that as soon as possible, as opposed to only when you start trying to conceive, discovering that. And if you only discover it when you try to conceive, I mean, that's then what happened. Then you address it when you discovered it. So typically what you'll be able to tell about your luteal phase through temping is you will be able to confirm ovulation. So you know that you ovulated, and then you'll be able to see, does your luteal phase sustain for 12 to 14 days. So somebody can have a short cycle, but still have a perfectly long, say 14-day luteal phase, but they just ovulate a little bit earlier in their cycle. So if your cycle is shorter, you'll be able to tell, is it shorter because I ovulated earlier, or is it shorter because my luteal phase is short? If your luteal phase is shorter than, typically you're looking at 12 to 14 days, but let's say if it's shorter than around 10 days, this may be an indication that the progesterone isn't holding, it isn't sustaining long enough to give you a nice lengthy luteal phase. This could potentially impact conception, and the reason why is because when you ovulate, it fertilizes the egg, it still needs to implant in the uterus, and that whole little trip down and the implantation and all of that can take 6 to 12 days. And if your luteal phase is only 10 days, and it takes 11 or 12 days to implant in the uterus, you can see how that will impact on the conception journey. I'm not saying that's definitely the case. What I'm saying is that you can get feedback through your cycle, and then you can look into it further if you would like to. What you could also tell about your luteal phase through using your temperatures is if you aren't getting a nice jump between your pre-ovulation and your post-ovulation temperatures. So if you are seeing a rise in your temperature, but it's just kind of like hovering a little bit, that might be an indication that your body, again, isn't producing sufficient estrogen to really shoot that temperature up post-ovulation. For me, my choice of health is a pro-metabolic approach. This is one resource that I've used. But generally, I'm looking at my temperatures as an indication of my health. So that's why it was also important for me to get very accurate temperatures. What is going on with my health from those, and are my health efforts resulting in what I would like to see? In most fertility awareness resources, and maybe I can make a video detailing this in more depth, but I'm just going to mention it for this one, they will speak of what your cycle will tell you about your thyroid or your metabolic health specifically. Because your metabolic health will generally impact your cycle or the temperatures that you have. Our thyroid health and our hormonal health are completely intertwined and very much dependent on each other. So if you do have a slightly overactive or underactive thyroid, you may be able to pick that up through your temperatures, through either seeing your chart be a lot higher than what the average chart is, or seeing your chart be a lot lower than what the average chart is. I am not saying use that as a definitive diagnostic tool. I'm saying, like everything else in your cycle, take it as a sign from your body and then investigate something further if you want to. So for example, if you're consistently seeing low temperatures, you might want to consider doing a thyroid panel just to see whether it is or isn't that is resulting in the slightly lower temperatures. What I can say from my experience, because I did my charting before I started doing a pro-metabolic approach. When I did the pro-metabolic approach and I was really focused on thyroid health, I've never been diagnosed with a thyroid condition or anything like that. I've never even had my thyroid tested. But when I focused on metabolic health, I saw that my entire chart shifted upwards. All of my temperatures, my pre and my post ovulation, my whole chart just moved up a little bit. And that for me was incredible feedback on the health efforts that I'd been putting in because I was attempting to improve my metabolic state. Okay, so that's not me diagnosing anybody. That's not me saying you do have this or don't have that. What I'm saying is take information that your cycle is giving you, look into it if you want to, do further testing if you want to. If you don't want to, then don't. I discussed what it would mean if your luteal phase is a little bit shorter than the average 12 to 14 days. Now I'm going to discuss what it means if it is longer. So that is to say, what does it mean when your high temperature part of your cycle is longer than 12 to 14 days? So the first one could be like the example I gave earlier in this video where my body just wanted to heat up a little to protect me from, I don't know, germs or something. So sometimes our body will just heat us up as a protective mechanism. So it could have been something like that, which is why it's important to use other markers as well so that you can be able to tell whether it is as a result of your cycle or a result of something else. Or another reason is that maybe you mistook ovulation when you hadn't ovulated in that time, which could have very easily happened for me when I saw the temperature spike a little bit earlier in that cycle. It's probably why I'm so big on saying that you need to use other markers, other primary markers, but also some other secondary markers is nice. The second and I guess last reason why the luteal phase can be longer is the obvious one, which is pregnancy. To confirm ovulation has taken place, what you typically want to do is see that rise in temperature and then wait about 3 days of high temperatures before you fully confirm that you've ovulated. The more confident you become in reading the signs from your body, the less you'd need to wait for those 3 days of high temperatures. In my case, sometimes it's not 100% clear to me and I feel that I would like to wait 3 days, but other times I'm very confident. And as soon as I see that first jump, I'm like, yes, done ovulating, entered into my not fertile luteal phase. It's also important for me to know because I do change my supplements depending on whether I'm pre-ovulation or ovulation or whether I'm post-ovulation. Not an excessive change to my supplements, but enough that I definitely want to know when can I start taking a particular supplement and when do I stop taking the one that I was taking in my follicular phase. Now, how would you know if it is a pregnancy? Through your temperatures. So remember I said your luteal phase is typically 12 to 14 days and you'll know what your typical average is through temping. If you see about 3 temperatures past what your typical luteal phase is, you can probably assume that it is as a result of pregnancy. So what people typically say is that you're looking at 16 to 18 days of raised temperatures to be an indication of pregnancy. That is to say that the number of days of high temperatures after your ovulation is about 16 to 18 days. If your pregnancy is sustained, you're typically looking at the entire, well, no, it's not going to be 40 weeks because you've had those 2 weeks already, but the rest of the 38 weeks, you're typically looking at your temperature staying up. If the pregnancy is not sustained, so for example, if you have a chemical pregnancy, what you'll typically see is that the temperature stays high beyond your typical luteal phase, but then it will drop off either when the bleeding starts or right before the bleeding starts, or sometimes right after the bleeding, like a day or so after the bleeding, if the progesterone's gone very high and it needs more time to come down. I've had a chemical pregnancy and I do have all of the information from that chart, so I'd be happy to share that for anybody who's interested in seeing these variations of charts with different factors affecting it. 2 things to note on temping and pregnancy. So what you can potentially see, and I have had this, where you will see your lower temperatures pre-ovulation and ovulation, you may or may not see an ovulation dip, and then you'll see that rise to your luteal phase. And if the pregnancy happens, sometimes you can see another jump upwards, and then it will sustain that extra high temperature. This is called the Triphasic pattern. I think that's what it's called, where you will basically see 3 different temperatures as opposed to your lower one and then your higher one, drop off if you're not pregnant. Then you will see lower, higher, and then higher. Again, please do not stress that this is an indication of a more or less successful pregnancy if you do or don't have that. I have had it and I can tell you from personal experience, it was not an indication of a more successful pregnancy. It is just something that is nice to note, but please don't internalize it as it is meaning something good or bad. Similarly to the ovulation dip. Some people have it, some people don't have it. You might have it with one pregnancy, you might have it with none of your pregnancies, you might have it with one and then not the other, or all of them. Don't read too much into it other than that it's nice and fun to see. Another thing I want to say to people who are trying to conceive, who are using this method because you are trying to conceive, you may hear about an implantation dip. So this is, maybe or maybe not, you had your ovulation dip, then your temperatures went up. And then remember I said a fertilized egg takes about 6 to 12 days to implant in the uterus. Sometimes people can see an implantation dip in their temperatures when that fertilized egg implanted in the uterus. And I know people trying to conceive generally experience, and I did also, the 2 weeks to find out if it was or wasn't successful. I don't know, I don't have the words for it. It's a time, it's a thing. But anyway, what I want to say is please do not read into an implantation dip. Do not get bummed out if you don't see an implantation dip. Do not think that this was not the cycle because you didn't see an implantation dip. And potentially, you can get excited if you want to, if you happen to see a little bit of a dip in your temperatures there in your luteal phase. If getting excited about that is great for you, but try not to read too much into a little bit of a dip in your luteal phase when you're trying to conceive in it already. I really don't have the words for that today, but anybody trying to conceive will know what I'm talking about. Again, having an implantation dip is not an indication of a more or less successful pregnancy. It's not a sign of that at all. Similar to the ovulation dip, it might happen, it might not happen. It's cool to see, but it's also completely fine to not see it. I do have all of my pregnancy charts, so I will make videos discussing them one at a time, and you can see what mine looked like if that is interesting for you. Now I want to get back to if you're using the fertility awareness method to avoid pregnancy. If you're using this method to avoid pregnancy, remember we spoke about ovulation and then your temperature rise is going to go up. Your luteal phase is your not fertile phase. So that is your time where you can have sex and not get pregnant. But that does mean that you need to be very sure that you have ovulated, that you most definitely ovulated, and the fertile window is closed. So use all of the other markers to see that ovulation is coming. And then I would recommend in the beginning, if you're getting the hang of it, or if that ovulation wasn't a very obvious one, to wait at least 3 days of high temperatures post-ovulation before, you do the stuff. But again, the more confident you become, and I spoke about this at length in my How Not to Get Pregnant video, the risk that you take is in your hands. So if you just want to wait 1 day and you feel comfortable with that, then do that, because the risk is in your hands how you use this method. For me, if I'm very confident about my ovulation in a particular cycle, then 1 jump is sufficient for me. But it also depends how much I most definitely do not want to get pregnant in that cycle. If I most definitely do not want to get pregnant in that cycle, even if I'm very sure of my ovulation, I might still just wait like 2 high temperature days. And then days where I'm unclear or I want to be very risk averse, I'll wait 3 high temperature days. Okay, then I just want to conclude this video with 2 final notes, and I'm not sure that I'm going to do them justice by how I say this, so I'm hoping I get the message across, even if I use language that's not very ideal. My language today seems to be failing me, so just bear with me. So the first one is don't get too bogged down by outliers. That is to say, remember I said don't hold on hope to ovulation dip, implantation dip, seeing the 3rd temperature jump, but also don't get too bogged down by random outliers in your cycle. Like I said earlier in this video, you are bound to see outliers. Just make a note in whatever you're using to record your cycle if you do know what it is caused by. Don't get upset if you randomly see a spike in your pre-ovulation temperatures or you randomly see a dip in your post-ovulation temperatures. It's completely normal to experience some random outliers as you're tracking your cycle. Now, this final thing is a thing that I'm not sure I'm going to say properly, but the recommendation that I would like to make, and I'm saying this as somebody in the arena with you, I'm saying this out of experience, not standing my pedestal, speaking like from like, oh, I know how to do this. It's more, I'm kind of saying this to myself as well and to anybody who's doing this with me. And that is, try not to get stressed out by your temperatures. Try not to let tracking become a stressful thing in your life. And I know that there are times when it can. Specifically when people are trying to conceive, I have watched many a video or people have told me where it was just too stressful for them to track their cycle while they were trying to conceive. Or another one, and this one is very true for me as well, where I was putting in a lot of effort into my health and I was getting frustrated that I wanted to see feedback sooner. And sometimes along the way, when the stakes feel high, it can start to feel stressful to track your cycle. So I'm not sure what to say to help with that necessarily, but what I do want to say is I have always like soldiered on through that, even when I did feel a bit anxious about it or stressed about it. In hindsight, I was grateful because I remember there was a time I was frustrated that my temperatures weren't as high as I was wanting to see them. And it is tempting to just be like, well, I don't want to use this metric anymore because it's bumming me out. But then when I did see my temperatures go up, I was really grateful to have had that previous data. And it's the same thing with my trying to conceive journey and our conception journey. If you follow my Instagram, you will know that that has been one roller coaster of a journey. And throughout that, I tracked everything. As tempting as it was at times to not, in hindsight, I'm grateful that I had that data and then I could reflect on it. So all I can say, or the kind of message I'm hoping to get across to myself and to you, is to not allow it to become a stressful thing. To observe what we're observing, internalize that information a bit, but not to let it become heavy or stressful or a source of anxiety. To have gratitude to our bodies for sending a sign and a signal to us, letting us know, hey, we're not quite where we want to be, or just sending a sign of something else in our cycle, even if that message is difficult to receive or not. I think a message, even if it's difficult to receive, is better than not receiving the message. I try to change my mindset to have gratitude towards my body, even if it's saying things I don't want to hear, and to also find joy in the process of tracking, even in the times that it can be difficult to do so. So I hope that this was helpful for you, or that it was interesting for you, or you found some value out of this video. Let me know if you are excited to see me unpack charts at various times in my life with their various factors that impacted on that, if that would be interesting for you. Remember, you can follow my Instagram and watch my stories to in real time track with me. And if you liked this video and found it interesting, please remember to actually like this video, comment down below questions or feedback that you might have, and remember to subscribe to my channel. So thanks for being here.